welcome, guys, to episode 1 of season 2. Ben McCrossan, CEO and co-founder of Ensemble Space, joins us today. Ensemble Space are building a pioneering space weather intelligence company leveraging cutting-edge science and advanced machine learning. On this episode, Ben takes us back on his journey from the US military to the space sector, how he got there, and the mentors that supported him along the way.
Good. Well, thanks for joining. It'd be great, I guess, if you could kick us off, starting back from the early days of Ben McCrossan, talk us through where you started in life, where you grew up, school, college, that sort of thing, and eventually how you found your way into your earlier career at the US Navy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a Phoenix suburb called Glendale, Arizona. So I was there through high school, and really enjoyed go back and visit often. So kind of, I think maybe this story really kind of gets interesting around the high school time frame. But I took physics in high school, and I think at that point is really kind of where I kind of loved the subject, and then knew I wanted to go into to engineering. And so that's kind of, I think, was what really set me on the STEM trajectory, was just really enjoying that subject. I think a lot probably just has to do with good teacher at the time and enjoying the material. So when I was looking for schools, it was admittedly not the most nuanced process, where I knew I wanted to go into an engineering school. I growing up in Arizona, it's a very warm place, and so I was very scared to go into a cold place. So I was looking at what are the best engineering schools that have they're in some warm locations, and so that's really what was the pointing me towards Georgia Tech. And so really not a sophisticated evaluation process, but it all worked out well. And so I ended up going to Georgia Tech for undergrad and studying engineering there. And I originally planned on going into aerospace and defense industry. I didn't really have any intention of going to active duty military, and didn't really have much family that had done that, or other kind of influences going in. And while I was in there, was kind of still interested in some of the, I guess, deeper physics, and was kind of interested in nuclear. And so was exploring a few different things, and then found out about an opportunity with the US Navy. And I was originally looking at being in some type of role that was a little bit more on the design side, and then started talking to it, and had a few friends that were in RTC programs also planning to go into the military. And then it was a bit of a kind of a turning point where I decided it would be a very fulfilling opportunity to be on the operational side, actually using the technology, and not purely on the R&D side, building it. And I thought that this was something that I could do now, and then would always be able to go back to the more traditional engineering side later. And I thought there's very little chance that I would do something like that for a while, and then pivot otherwise. And so it was a very long deliberation process, and didn't really have that plan going in, but made the decision about halfway through my undergrad that I was going to be going in. And so that's kind of how I got my foot in the door going into the Navy. But yeah, really, even when I signed up, when I started, I showed up without having kind of a great sense of what it would actually be like. But it worked out really well. It was a very rewarding experience. Got pretty lucky too. I was stationed out in Hawaii for a couple of years, and had nice. some great experiences there. And I think it was very really built a strong skill set going forward in my career. I think of course, the managed experience that we get is great. It was like 23, 24, I think, when I first had a division of like almost 30 people. And so there's kind of a lot of just exposure and kind of figure it out type of mindset. But it was, I think, very, very helpful. And then I think with the technology side too, we just operate such a kind of broad range of technologies on a naval ship. And so it's a bit of exposure to everything. And I think that was helpful. And then with the nuclear specific piece of that, the kind of a training philosophy that they always talk about is just drinking from a fire hose, where you just learn a lot of information. You just kind of have to try to digest, and you take it in. And even if you don't fully understand, you kind of just keep working at it to kind of refine incrementally. And I think that was actually a very helpful skill as I've kind of continued my career, tried to learn new topics in further detail. I think that kind of just the learning approach has been a good skill set as well.
Nice. No, good. Yeah, appreciate that. And I guess before we move on to the current day and what you guys are doing at Ensemble Space, what do you feel with the main, you touched on a couple of them there from a technology perspective, but being in the US Navy, what do you feel were the core kind of skill sets that you acquired that enabled you to implement them in everyday business and help you kind of shape, build, run, operate Ensemble Space? Were there any kind of key experiences or skill sets there that you learn that you adopt now every day in business?
Yeah, I think one of the I guess most kind of straightforward ones is like continuous learning. And so that's something that they really harped on. They would always have kind of these training programs that would, regularly just touch on like a new topic. And it's something that, just really trying to increase the overall, kind of level of knowledge across an organization. I think that that's like incredibly helpful. I think that in the space environment domain, I mean, there's just so many different subspecialties. And so I think that kind of really having a culture of continuously, learning, continuously improving, kind of continuously pushing everybody to be expanding their skill sets, both kind of down the narrow vertical, but also just expanding kind of their, more breadth-wise level of knowledge is very important. So that's something that I have kind of very directly implemented. I think that a lot of the things of just very kind of traditional management of, all right, how are you putting together schedules? How are you organizing meetings, structuring activities? I think that that's kind of a pretty traditional kind of a managerial skill set that helps develop. But I think the continuous learning is definitely one of those things that just very, very much stuck with me.
Good. And I guess going back onto Ensemble Space and what you guys are up to and how you fit into the space ecosystem, could you just give our listeners an overview of what Ensemble Space do, how you guys fit into the broader space ecosystem picture, and where do you see the company sort of evolving or going over the next 5 years?
Yeah. So Ensemble building a space environment intelligence platform. And so there's really three I guess kind of pillars of what we do. And so the first is data processing. Second one is the modeling. And then the third is generating the insights. So for data processing in space weather, there's a lot of talk about how scarce the observations are. And this is true, but something I was very much surprised to find is that there's a lot of data that's being, I think, underutilized, where stuff that's lower fidelity is kind of, I think, thrown out. But when you have a lot of lower fidelity observation sources, it's still pretty valuable compared to just kind of a small number of maybe higher fidelity ones. And so do a lot of novel data processing. The other piece is the modeling, so very machine learning heavy, but we try to incorporate some of the constraints into the known physics to best guide these problems, because there is less of it data available than in something like terrestrial weather, where you can do kind of just these purely data-driven methods. We try to kind of toe the line between the the physics and the machine learning, and then the last is the insight generation. And so trying to convert some of these metrics from something like a flux or a density value into an actual action that somebody would take. So whether they need to change the configuration, change their the planning. It's kind of the last mile, I think, of all the technology, is getting to an actual decision that somebody will make and assisting that process. So those are really the domains that we focus on. And now we are still very early stage, and a lot can happen in 5 years. But really, there's a few different segments that the space environment really impacts. And so our beachhead is the space industry. I think that it's very much the most kind of directly impacted, and it's I think a lot of tailwinds that really give it priority, because it's just, I think, very essential. And so the way that we see ourselves adding value to this is by extending the satellite lifetime. We think that if they're operated intelligently relative to the environmental conditions, we can extend satellite lifetime. We think we can increase the efficiency of operations and reduce the chance of catastrophic failures. And so this is really the problem that we're trying to solve for the space segment. I think it also contributes to stuff like human space flight. We're making sure any human missions are safe from things like radiation or things like that. I think further down the line, we're already kind of setting our sights on some of the terrestrial impacts of space weather, where stuff like the ionosphere is going to affect just about any kinds of RF signals going to and from satellites, and also some stuff like geomagnetic impacts, which will affect electric grids. But those are a little bit further down the roadmap, and the kind of near-term focus is on mitigating all of the issues for the space segment.
Exciting. Awesome. No, thanks for that. And I guess following on from that, I'm sure this is a question that all of our listeners will want to know. I'd like to know as well, just from a selfish, everyday average citizen consumer type perspective. But what would you say is the current status now on the space weather intelligence sector, and with all the evolution we're seeing of artificial intelligence, how do you see that evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? Because I know that there's so many weather applications out there now, and I think the everyday citizen is always like, what's the point of having them, because they never seem accurate. Like when you actually go on it, it says, okay, today's going to be, you know, sunny and highs are such and such, be raining here, and it's always, it seems almost impossible to predict. So yeah, what's your sort of current thoughts on the status overall, and where do you kind of see the sector evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so right now, I think I really do see a kind of a bit of a surge in this industry, and so I think there's
Yeah,
a handful of firms that have recently entered in this the space environment domain, and so I think that that's obviously it's becoming more competitive, but I think it's validating that this is a real opportunity, and it's a problem that needs to be better addressed. And I think that the competition kind of breeds innovation and excellence, and so I think that things will be moving, advancing very quickly in this domain. And I think that the biggest, I guess, differences now between, say, something like 10 years ago are that we have tailwinds on, I'd say, both sides, both on the technology and capability side as well as on the demand side. And so I think just with the build out of a lot of the cloud-based infrastructure, it's really facilitates aggregating and disseminating the data. I think that the machine learning frameworks really just make it easier to develop some of the models that we would use and deploy them. And then the proliferated satellite constellations now provide a lot of data sources. And this is one of the things I was talking about where, there were previously a handful of scientific missions that had these very precisely calibrated instruments. And those would work very well with some of the pure physics kind of based models where you need an input of one type. Whereas when you have these broader constellations without some of these very I guess purpose-built instruments,
yeah,
you can still get insights when you've got quite a few of them. And so I think there's really some tailwinds kind of giving us what we need to enhance the current state of the art. And then on the other side, I think that problems exist today that really didn't exist 10 years ago. So stuff like space congestion, where it is a problem that
yeah,
needs to be solved when you have some of these big geomagnetic storms like last May. I think there's something like 5,000 plus satellite maneuvers that were just automatic. And so you really lose track of the space traffic management picture. And so I think that it is a big demand on that side. Human spaceflight is another thing as we're going back into space. It's a very serious issue of making sure that all the astronauts are safe from the potential solar radiation. That's another issue that kind of wasn't as pressing 10 years ago. And then lastly, stuff like national security. I think that kind of globally, the space has kind of become a contested environment. And I think that there's a lot of concerns from that aspect as well that are drawing a lot of interest in kind of the space environment intelligence.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I guess, yeah, the everyday citizen, that kind of stuff in terms of space junk and space congestion, don't even think about. So yeah, really interesting points. And I guess now that you've kind of segued in to the space industry and been immersed in it for a few years, what is it you've sort of come to love most about the space sector and being involved with it and the technology and the people and everything else?
Yeah, it's a bit, I think, kind of a bit maybe adjacent or outside of it. So one of the things I love the most about going to it is just the kind of pure level of interest and excitement in what they're doing. I think that it is not something that many industries have. Going to an event like Small Sat, it's like every single person there just loves space. They love talking about it. They're excited about all the emerging technologies. They're very curious to hear what other people are building. They're excited to talk about what they're doing. And I think that is something that's very rare where everybody, I think, in the space industry wants to be there. It's not so much something that people kind of stumble into and just end up, they got a foot in the door and they stick with it. It's something where I think people are very much passionate about it. They're excited by it. It's kind of inspiring, and so I think there's a very unique energy going to any of these events and just seeing everybody who loves what they do and is curious about it and excited. And I think that's really what I would say is the best part about being in the space industry.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Regardless of what event you go to, whether it's satellite in DC or small sat in Utah, the Space Symposium in Colorado, that energy is certainly there. And I think just from my perspective as well, everybody seems it seems like, of course, there's always competition in the industry, but everyone generally seems like they are pulling together in the same direction. Everybody is on the same mission for the betterment of our planet and our species, and the amount of companies that you see are constantly collaborating, meeting with each other, and seeing how they can infuse in and increase and explore different technologies is really inspiring as well. And you mentioned a word there, curiosity, and that kind of leads me on to my next questions. One of the big motives of starting this whole podcast is to try and attempt to make space accessible for everyone. So one of the hot topics, not just now, it has been for years, and these events that you mentioned, when I go to the events as well, everybody kind of talks about it, is that the space industry is growing, it's vibrant, it's exciting, which is incredible. I guess the concern is, how are we going to sustain the level of talent to actually do those jobs and take the space industry forward. I think even now when I talk about space with friends, family and stuff, everyone kind of has that perception that it's all astronauts and astrophysicists. So I guess from a collective point of view, not just in the industry, but at kind of STEM level in schools, all schools, elementary, colleges, universities, etc. What do you think we can do now to try and impact that change? What can we do, I guess, differently in the classroom, in sort of everyday life in industry, to try and encourage the future generations to consider space as a potential career in the future?
Yeah, I think this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think that people are very much interested in it. And I think it's almost that I think for a bit of a time there was maybe fewer opportunities than people interested. And I think that now we're kind of seeing that rise is in this kind of emergence of this kind of commercial space industry. And I think that as there are more opportunities, I think a lot of people who at least that I know personally that studied stuff like aerospace engineering ended up going into fields like software. And I think it's largely just because of where opportunities were at the time. And so I think that as we see this really this boom in the space industry, I think that people who were interested but maybe for just kind of a opportunity sake pivoted to other things will certainly want to come back into space. I think that as far as getting maybe the broader STEM pool grown, I certainly think that that's something that's starts early. And I think there's a lot of different kind of levels of the earlier stage education, kind of exposure to the sciences, exposure to the technology space segment. But I think that kind of getting people that are kind of in college studying something STEM into the space industry is almost like I think it's an easy sell when compared to some other sectors that might not be quite as exciting to work in. I'd say the last comment on this is maybe that I think too there's always, I guess, like it's rocket science, and I think that there's a bit of a fear that it's almost too difficult to even attempt for some people who might not have the traditional backgrounds. And I think that that's probably the biggest opportunity, or the biggest maybe hurdle to get past, is that I think there are so many resources available for learning that it's not an impossible barrier where if you were not an aerospace engineer out of undergrad that you can't end up in the space industry and have a great career there and learn the necessary skills and develop. And so I think that might be one of the biggest kind of misconceptions, I think, to get past, that it's not so impossibly difficult. It's certainly a very difficult problem to solve, and requires a lot of skill and grit to get through some of those, but it's not impossible. And so I think that kind of just that mental hurdle where people think that without a necessary background it's unattainable is something that I think really should be shaken.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And like you say, there's so much resources out there now, and I think a part of that as well is making it relatable as well, right? I think definitely. People in different industries and stuff, even talking to kids, it's like describing to them things like, I don't know, Uber is technically a space company. So couldn't agree more. And the next one I wanted to touch on, I think, in terms of this episode, and I think this is important, especially for founders like yourself running space businesses, is to kind of highlight the challenges as well as the good stuff as well, because we see on social media the highlight reel, and we all kind of see the end product of people's journeys and all the the good stuff. So the kind of the whole failures and achievements piece with social media platforms and all that kind of stuff, what would you say, what do you consider, I guess, as career to date, your biggest lesson or your biggest failure, and what did you learn from that particular lesson? And on the other side of that fence, it'd be great to understand, what would you say is your biggest achievement career to date too?
So on the failure side, I think it actually is kind of a bit of a light one, kind of got me into this. But so after I was in the Navy, went into business school, and coming from a military background, really didn't understand the broader business landscape very well. And so I think a lot of veterans going into school kind of gravitates towards some of the more traditional career paths like finance or consulting. And I think that I kind of felt, certainly knew that I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, particularly in a more deep tech industry, but kind of felt, okay, maybe I don't have the necessary skill set to do so. And I kind of very, very briefly explored going into finance. And I think that one of the more eye-opening moments was I was in an interview, and immediately after at the end of it, the person was like, "I did not believe for a second that you wanted to do this," and they were spot on. And I think that was kind of eye-opening. And it's like, I think that it is difficult to compete with people that are passionate about something that when you don't have that passion. I think that was really something that kind of drove me to refocus and say, all right, even if it is a bit of a, unconventional path, it's like I should be focused on doing what I want to do, and not some roundabout, okay, let's maybe build the resume a bit, get a name brand, and then a network, and then do it. I think that was really a kind of eye-opening moment, that I need to be doing what I want, and that's really where I will have a competitive advantage, when it's like stuff that I love doing, that I'm very interested in. It's playing to my strengths. So I would say that was one of the more kind of guiding pieces along the way that really learn kind of enforce that reflection. So for I guess when I think that really launching this was a bit of a unconventional kind of a structuring, where we incubated this inside of another company. I was doing this while I was full-time in business school, and leaning on a lot of my professors on everything from like, how do I legally structure this, and how, who do I talk to, talking like a VC professor of like, how can I make this, look like clean and not like a bit of a Frankenstein, just because it was this unconventional. And I think that was something that took a lot of skill. We really modeled after like the venture studio, worked with the company, incubated this idea, and then was able to launch it. And I think it worked out pretty well, because we really were able to cover a lot of ground. And if I had waited later, kind of started from the ground up. And so I think that was one of my big accomplishments, is just that being able to kind of get that time back and start at a little bit further ahead than I would have otherwise. Because in this space, I mean, time is very essential, where everybody's gritty, everybody's wants to develop quickly. And so having the difference of a year plus in timing is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's great that you had that, not just the framework, but I guess the supportive community as well through business school. And that kind of leads me on to the next question. You've touched on a couple of the things already, but I guess for anybody that's listening to this, and you mentioned it earlier, that perception around, it's too hard, it's rocket science, it's astronaut, it's astrophysicists. And like I say, it's not just about the younger generation, schools, colleges. It could be someone who is in a completely different industry, automotive or, whatever it is. What would you say was the best resources that you identified and kind of utilized over the years, whether it be, courses, programs, the mentors, the professors that you mentioned, that kind of helped you with that transition into the space sector?
Yeah, I think that having people that you can lean on is absolutely huge. I think this was something that I really enjoyed about being a veteran, where it's a very tight-knit community. And I think that a lot of times they kind of spread out everywhere, and they've been incredibly receptive. If you have a question about somebody that you're looking for advice on, going into an industry, you want to just hear from somebody who's kind of been there and walked that path. They've been incredibly receptive. And so I think having a network of people that you can ask the questions to, or even can tell you what are the questions that you should be asking when you're thinking about going through things, is incredibly helpful. Because I think sometimes when you're on the outside looking at something, it is a bit of a black box where you're not even sure where to start to try to understand. And so I think having a network to reach out to is something that's incredibly helpful. And I think just kind of the boldness to go and reach out to strangers and be like, hey, I'm want to learn. I would like to get a little bit of advice. And I think that people are pretty receptive when you reach out respectfully, and have kind of questions to do it, and you're not just networking for the sake of of networking. I think that, if you're really looking for advice, people are more than happy to offer it. And so I think that that's something that's helpful. But I think that as far as resources, though, there's quite a bit out there. Business school is an incredible resource, but obviously it's not practical for everybody to go that route. But for a lot of just the pure hard skills, I mean, there's so much available online, whether like Coursera or even YouTube. I mean, there's university classes fully published on YouTube. You can get the homeworks, the exams online, and you can really get all of that without going through the traditional programs. So if there's any skills that you want to develop, I mean, you could go through an entire aerospace engineering curriculum just off of YouTube or Coursera. And I think that that's kind of one of those things that people don't really realize. They think that, oh, they need to have a university there. And I mean, there certainly is some benefit to having like a TA that can walk you through it. But I think that, with a bit of grit, you can get through the materials and you can kind of learn the skills that are necessary. So I think that it's just kind of something that people almost write off before actually giving it a shot. And so I think that there's something that, space environment touches so many things, where there's like the radiation physics that's related to, astronaut health. There's like the astrodynamics and all of the conjunction analysis piece. There's all of the RF impacts that go to the ionosphere, so touching like PNT signals. And so there's just too many domains to really be an expert in everything. And so being able to kind of quickly get to a reasonable level of knowledge in all these is very, it's essential in kind of what we do. And so something I really like to kind of iterate on and improve. And so I do think it's also worth like thinking about what is the best way to learn stuff, because sometimes people will find like one course and be like, okay, well, I'll do this and then I'll have the skill set at the end of it. And that's kind of, if they don't like the course, maybe they'll say, okay, well, I guess I couldn't do it. But I think really kind of having a plan of what are the end goals that you want as far as skill set or knowledge, and then really kind of putting a lot of time into how do you get there is something that will, I think, pay dividends for any skill set development.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you're dead right. I think a lot of people sometimes kind of forget how easy it is to access these resources now, even like the modern day apps, like you just mentioned there, the YouTubes, Google and stuff. And going back to what you said as well, and having that kind of, I guess, courage to reach out to people, the power of connection, LinkedIn, going to these events that we spoke about earlier on in the episode, and actually just spending that time with people. And from my experience anyway, and I'm sure you've had the same, when you do reach out to people in this industry, people are always willing to help, regardless of what it's about. That's one thing I've really found about the space industry. People are willing to help you out. So just kind of taking that step, connecting with people on LinkedIn, going to the events and asking for people. And like you said earlier on in the show, people that are in the industry are passionate about it. So why wouldn't they want to talk about it and help someone else to get into the industry? So yeah, couldn't agree more. Great. Well, I guess our final question before we get to that, I just want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show today. It's been great. Really enjoyed the episode. I guess the final question for us to close out here is, and this kind of underpins everything we've been talking about, is that person that we're talking about here who's kind of looking from the outside in to the space industry, that wants to get into space, whether they're technical or they're not technical, they're an engineer, they're a salesperson, whatever it is, whether it's a technical, non-technical background, what advice would you give to that person looking to get into the space sector in 2025?
I think that the biggest piece of advice is, if you want to be in the space sector, then make the jump. I think there's so many kind of excuses that you can have of, okay, maybe I need to get more, relevant experience or try to find some type of connection. And I think that I found the best way is just to rip the Band-Aid, make the jump, figure out what it takes for the roles that you're looking at, and really kind of prepare directly for that. I think it's very easy to get kind of lost in some of these 3 or 5 year plans of, oh, well, maybe if I get a, adjacent position that kind of helps me in, this company, this not a space company, and then that'll help me do it. I think sometimes it's best just to go straight for it. And then, even if it is a bit, uncomfortable, or, you might not be as prepared as you would have liked to, is once you're there, you can kind of figure out the rest. And so I'd certainly go, just go right for it. But also, I think just harp on kind of what I've been mentioning is building out the skill set. There's a lot of, resources available, and it's going to be very much, I think, dependent on what, you are trying to do as far as roles. And so it's not, it's not just engineers at space companies. They have all the same kind of business, personnel that any other company would have. And so I think that it's something that, you don't need to be an aerospace, background to to work in a space company. There's it helps to have kind of, you know, the curiosity and the interest, but it's like you don't need to have all those you know, the classes under your belt or anything like that. It's like, you know, you can just do it. And I would recommend people just to, you know, get curious, talk to people in the industry, learn a little bit about it, and try to understand the kind of roles or companies that they're going to be going for, and just you know, going for it, reaching out to people, those companies, trying to understand when they're hiring, you know, applying to the available roles, and just doing it.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and it certainly makes it easier to get out of bed in the morning too. I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, regardless of background. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. Ben, thank you so much. Thanks for joining
Thank
us
you.
today. It's been a great episode. And yeah, thanks ever so much for your time. Have a great week, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great.
Take care. All
Have a
right,
good
thanks,
one.
Ben. Cheers.